I'm an Indigenous woman, and we were the first ones to actually pioneer Indigenous Executive Search right across Canada. My great-grandparents came from Broken Head broke away from Peguis, but Broken Head and Hollow Water. So they didn't want my grandmother and her siblings to go to residential school because they had gone to residential school and it was really bad, and they were hard workers. So they took scrip land on the Red River. So the federal government of Canada gave them land if they signed away their treaty rights. And my grandmother and all her siblings were born in a sod hut in a Winnipeg winter, lived off the land. They were farmers, they fished. My grandfather had a trap line. They were very traditional. And then 29 years later, the province of Manitoba came along and said, okay, all you Métis along the Red River, you have 6 months to pay back taxes. And they didn't have any money because they lived off the land. And they said, you got 6 months to pay back taxes, and if you can't pay them, sorry, but we have to expropriate your land. So they took all the Métis land, and we were moved into, Winnipeg. And so we went into the Selkirk area, and Selkirk Avenue, and I lived with my grandmother, and we were told, whatever you do, don't tell people you're Indigenous, because they won't hire you. So, if we could get away with not saying we're Indigenous, we've had to be resilient. We've worked so hard. We've worked around it. Lots of things that have affected us that people just absolutely don't know. My mom remarried, and my dad ended up in the military, and so he was gone, and my mom remarried a Cree man. I actually grew up, my dad went to residential school, his mother went to residential school, and it was not a good situation, and so I had to leave home at 15. I slept in the park until I could, couch surf, and I worked my way through high school, and I had to do that. And that was the only thing we could do in those days, because I'm in my 60s. There was no food banks. There was very hard to get social assistance. So again, it builds to resiliency. We're so resilient. So did those things affect us? Did they affect me? Did they affect my family? Absolutely they did. So people look at me and think, oh yeah, she did great and wonderful things, and it was easy. Well, it actually wasn't that easy. Do I feel sad? Absolutely not, actually. It made me who I am. Well, it's a good news. It's a bad news, good news story. Mostly good news story. So I had been in staffing and recruitment for many years, and in management throughout Canada. Started off my career in Alberta, and then in the Ontario market, and I came back to Winnipeg. I'm a Anishinaabe, originally from Manitoba, so I'm a Ojibwe Métis. Treaty status on one side, Métis on the other, and identify as a Métis woman here in Manitoba. So when I came back to Manitoba about 20 years ago, I decided to check out different opportunities in the search realm. And there was nobody that just did search, but there were a couple of firms that had executive search as part of their HR consulting package. So I went to work for one of the larger firms that did a variety of services. And in consulting, this is for the students now of Asper, that I think they need to hear this because sometimes you don't know, is in consulting, you need to be billable 80% of the time. So if you're running, let's say, a legal practice, if you're working for a law firm or an accounting firm, and you're expected to work 40 hours in a week, you're expected to bill out, 32 hours a week, which is 80% of 40. And so anyway, I was doing search, and after about 10 months, I said to the owners of the firm, I think there's a need for Aboriginal executive search, and I think, we could develop a market niche. No one was doing it at that point. And they said that they didn't think there was a market for it at all. But if I wanted to do it, I could actually do it, but not on my 8 hours of non-billable, because in those other 8 hours, you're having, project meetings, you're having meetings with clients that you can't bill at, or training and development opportunities, or doing paperwork. So they said, you can develop it on your own time, but if it's a market, go ahead and try. So after about a few months working at it, because I had a good network right across Canada, we actually got some pretty senior significant searches. One was for the Aboriginal Healing Foundation, so I worked with George Erasmus to do the first board, put together the management team there. We did National Aboriginal Health Organization. We did the National Center for First Nations Governance board and some executives there, and a number of other initiatives and projects for Government of Canada, Health Canada. But anyway, so it was pretty good. But the group, that I was working with didn't know a lot about, our community. So there were some components of cross-cultural training that I had to get them to agree to for the staff, and they weren't real keen on it, but they did it because we were driving some income there. And then what ended up happening, I was there for about 2 years after that, and then probably about a third of the revenue of the firm of 11 people was coming in from our community, and I couldn't do all the work, and it wasn't being done really well. But anyway, in our community, so if you're an Indigenous student, you'd know that, especially in those days, people would find out what you're doing, and let's say somebody from Long Plains, their nephew or their son graduated from the University of Saskatchewan in engineering, and somebody would come into our office and would say, I want to speak to Brenda, and I want to drop off my son's resume. And so I had got the receptionist to agree that if someone from our community would come in, that they would have a seat, be given a coffee, and at least let me know if I was on the phone to come out when I could, or if I was in a meeting, I would pop out to say hi. And so there'd be probably at least one person a week, or two people every 2 weeks, or 3 weeks. So that was happening for a while. And one day on a Friday, the owner of the firm called me into her office, and she said, we're running an HR consulting executive search firm. And I said, yeah, I'm aware of that. And she said, well, you cannot have all these Native people sitting in our waiting room. And so I was pretty shocked, usually not at a loss for words whatsoever, if you know me. And I went home quite depressed on a Friday. And so on the Monday, I went in and I resigned and just said, I'd give my 2 weeks and work from home. And she actually asked me to stay a little bit longer, but I agreed, that I would have to work from home. So this was May, and it was in 1999. So it was quite a while ago, actually. And I decided that my kids were like teenagers, and I was a single parent at the time. And I thought, well, I'll, put up my sign and I'll say that I'm doing search. I have a network across Canada from people that I knew previously. I had a non-compete, so I couldn't approach anybody that I had already solicited and brought in the door for a year, at the firm. And I went out on my own. I thought, well, if this doesn't work by September, October, I'll just go and get another job, whatever that is. It would be fine, right? So it went well. So within a few months, we were up to a team of about 4 or 5, and we were doing search. And I also always maintained a practice in mainstream, because when I worked previously, it was never in the community. It was always in mainstream. So I had a good clientele there as well. So no, it went well. And I was pretty bitter and I was pretty disappointed. But at the end of the day, I think it was Creator's way of getting me to do my own business. And it was the plan all along, but it's not something that I would start out and done on my own at all. So that's how it got started. Yeah. And what we are today is, a firm that truly services nationally. We just released on our website today, I'll put it out on LinkedIn today. We just released it though, a actually a picture of Canada, and we have done search work in every territory and every province of Canada. And so we service First Nations, we service Indigenous, nonprofits in that realm, as well as corporations, because we have more and more corporations in the Indigenous realm now. Many times it's our firm that's hired to do their first CEO or their first executive director. And it's been a really great journey. It's been a wonderful journey.